my name is Lance, and this is Amped About Aimpad. For today's episode, I had a couple of questions kind of rolling around in my head that I just wanted to get to the answer to, and so that first question is how long does it actually take to press a mechanical key switch, whether it be optical or a normal mechanical switch? And then the second question is, does it actually matter where in that press that activation happens? Does that actually make any meaningful difference whatsoever? So let's get into it. Alright, so this whole question came to mind when one of my friends sent me this web page at remu.net, and basically it is a way to test how fast you can click the mouse in the game Cookie Clicker. So I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but my son plays it every once in a while, where you try to, by clicking a cookie, it activates a point value and a bunch of cookies, and I don't know, cookies and clicking. It's not my type of game, but more or less the whole point of this was that my friend was saying, well, this game can test how fast you can click the mouse. Like, how fast can you click that mouse? Can you click it really, really fast? So I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. So you basically like click this thing as fast as you can and try to make it as quick as you can. And then it kind of gives you an average of like, all right, how many clicks did you do it per second? And so you try and like say, well, I'm freaking fast. I can click that mouse super fast. I can click it 8.67 times a second. Actually peaked at 10 clicks per second. So 10 clicks in 1 second, that's freaking fast, right? So if you think about it, 10 clicks per second, it's pretty simple math, but let's just take the average of it. So I'm saying, okay, in 1 second, I can say 8.67. So if I say 1 divided by 8.67, then we times that by 1,000. So it takes me roughly 115 milliseconds per click and that's, again, that's a click. So that's the time in between one click and another click is registered. So that's the amount of time it takes for me to press the mouse, release it, and then press it again. Okay, so 100 milliseconds. So I was like, okay, that's kind of slow, right? Maybe. I think generally as PC gamers, we think we're super fast. Like, we can do things ridiculously fast, and we can see things fast. We can tell the difference between 144 refresh rate monitor and 60 frames per second, and we can tell the difference because we're just that awesome. And this got me thinking, like, 115 milliseconds, that's kind of slow. I thought it's faster than that. So then I came across this other website called Human Benchmark, and I was like, oh, okay, well, this is going to benchmark how fast I respond to stuff. So clearly, if I see something and I can like respond to it really quickly, then it can show that I am fast, right? So what this does is it basically has a random time interval set up where the screen will turn green, and then I need to click it as fast as I possibly can. So as soon as it turns green, I'm going to click the mouse, and it's going to do it 5 times. So I'm waiting for it to be green, waiting for it to be green, click. Okay, and then to keep going. Oh, got to keep going. Okay, waiting for it to turn green. Okay, and then wait for it to turn green. Okay, and waiting for it to turn green. All right, 194. Woo! So we use this as bragging rights with our friend. 194 is pretty good, but the average here is again 214 milliseconds. So I was like, really? I'm that freaking slow? You think of things like less than 10 milliseconds or less than 5 milliseconds. That's fast. 214, that's slow. So this got me thinking, okay, well, maybe it has something to do with like the delay that it's coming over the internet and things like that. Like I need to remove this whole internet and unknown factor. I'm purely, I've got to be faster than that. Plus, we're also testing the mouse. I'm more interested in the keyboard. I want to know how long it takes for me to press that key for the keyboard itself. Not the mouse, because the mouse is like super small and it's like you can kind of make it go really fast. The keyboard has mechanical components, and like the normal cherry switch activates at 2 millimeters. So this isn't really answering my question. So what I decided to do was to set up a system that tests purely visual light separate from the computer, and then how it reacts, or how I react to that light and how fast I can press the key. So I set up this whole other device. All right, so in order to test this, what I decided to do was basically set up an Arduino here that is designed to basically make an LED flash at random times. So to take a look at the actual code that's happening here is basically what's going on is I am setting up a random time between 3,000 milliseconds and 6,000 milliseconds, or 3 to 6 seconds, and turning on the LED for about 10 milliseconds and then turning it off. Okay, that's pretty much it. So just a random number, and sometime between 3 seconds and 6 seconds the light is going to turn on. So now I have this arranged to set up right here so that I can see the LED, and then I have this program set up called Aqua's Key Test that will, as you press a key, it will make the keys turn on the screen. So what I'm doing is taking my camera, and I'm using my cell phone because it has the ability to capture 120 frames per second. My monitor has a refresh rate of 144 hertz. So the limiting factor is going to be the phone capturing this data. So I'm setting it up as a slow motion video. And then what I'm going to do is basically capture the time between when the LED turns on and in the time that the key press shows up. So I'm going to use the D key to measure. And basically what I'm going to do is start recording here and then watch for the LED to turn on. I wasn't quite ready. So I see it. One capture. Two captures. Three captures. 4 captures. 5 captures. Okay, so I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to take this video and export it, and we'll kind of review what is involved with that process. All right, so what I've done is plugged in my cell phone to my computer and then exported the video file. Then I can use VLC Media Player to basically play back that file and then capture each individual frame and dump each frame to a single file. So from that minute or so of recording, there was 3,000 frames that were dumped out of there. So a ton of data here. And so I don't want to bore you with doing everything that I've done, but what I have basically tried to do is you visually scan through all of these files until you see the LED turning on. So in this particular frame, you can see that I have the LED is turning on. So this is the point in time where my eyes saw the LED turn on, and I'm going to respond to it. So the delay in time is going to be directly related to the number of frames or the number of files that are existing in that time. So the first one I'm going to count as frame number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. Okay, so 33. So for this particular point in time, it took 33 frames of time in order to respond to that visual stimulus. So I took this information and dumped it to Excel, and you can see here that it is using the activation point of 2 millimeters, so that's the normal cherry activation point, 2 millimeters down, is when I was capturing it. And then it took 33 for that first time. The second time it took 30, so I was a little bit faster, and then 31, 32, and the last one I kind of sucked, I got 51. But that averaged out to 35 frames of time, and I think that's a pretty accurate representation. And because we were capturing at 120 frames per second, the average amount of time is about 8 milliseconds of time passes for each individual frame. So we can multiply those two numbers together, and we get an average latency of 294. So that's very similar to the effect that we were seeing with the program online. So there's very little difference between actual physical limitations of what we might be seeing and interactions online. Basically what we're coming to the conclusion here is that we're really slow. We might think, oh, that we have superhuman gaming capabilities, and those pro gamers, they can activate a key press in like 10 milliseconds. Bullcrap. There's no freaking way. You are not that fast. It takes a certain amount of time for your muscles to respond, for your eyes to see things, and the human factor in this whole equation is a big part of it. That's not to say that getting a high refresh monitor of 144 hertz is better, is not better than 60. I think it actually visually is. You can perceptibly tell that difference. It's not to say that a keyboard that can have a response time of 1 millisecond is faster than one that does 128 or whatever. It all basically adds up. This is true. But the biggest limiting factor is the human. So part of that human faction is the key press, like what your finger is doing when you move it down. Now, I haven't been able to isolate that with this. I just know that that is a part of the equation, but not how long it does it actually take that key to move down. So I could do this exact same test, and because we're using analog switches, we can sense anywhere in that key press where the key press is actually happening. However, I didn't want to bias my results by saying, okay, well, I'm going to set up the key press to be at the very top, so this is going to be faster. So in my mind, I'm thinking, all right, this is going to be faster, and then that leads to my actually performing faster. And then if I move it down the bottom, I'm like, oh, well, it's just so much slower. I didn't want any of that type of effect happening. I wanted it to be completely removed from the equation. So what I had to do is use my handy dandy trusty Arduino chip again to set up something new. So I'm going to show you basically what I did to set that up. All right, so setting up with my Arduino again, I have basically added this little servo. So a servo is basically a motor that will kind of move along a spectrum of 180 degrees usually. And basically what you can do is you can say, hey, motor, I want you to move from this degree point to this degree point. And then along that spectrum, you can say how long you want it to take and all that type of stuff. So it's basically a way to specifically position a lever. So you can see I have this basically set up so that the keyboard is here, and I have the servo, the chip here, and then the LED. And what that allows me to do is, if you take a look at the actual code, this is what's happening. So I call this my button simulator 2018. So more or less what we have is this variable called position, and I have this set up as the number 20. So that directly corresponds to a degree. So it says 20 degrees. So that's where the servo is going to be. And then what the first thing I'm doing is saying, okay, I'm going to set the position to be 20 degrees. So it's going to go wherever it is at that point in time. It says, oh, make it 20. And then as long as the position is less than 40 degrees, run this other code. So what the first thing it's going to do is increase it by 1 degree. So it's going to go from 20 to 21 to 22 to 23, all the way, keep on repeating that over and over again until it gets to 40. You can see here that the first thing I do when I have started this process is I turn the LED off, okay? Then I'm going to tell the position to move. So its LED is turned off. It writes the position, which is going to be 21 at this point. And then I wait 48 milliseconds and then repeat it again. It's going to be 22, 23, 24, and it's going to have a delay of 48 milliseconds. So basically what it's doing is this is the part where the key, or the servo is actually releasing the key and moving up to its top position, okay? Because that's 40 degrees. So down is 20 and then up is 40, okay? As soon as it gets to 40, or as long as it's no longer 40, this code no longer applies, and it switches to doing something else, which is to turn the LED on, okay? And then I'm having a delay in microseconds by 100 microseconds, so a very, very small amount of time. And so it should be a split second of time that this LED is turned on, okay? Then we go back to this beginning part of the code again, and it says, okay, set it to be 20, okay? So it's going to go, as soon as it rises, and it's going to go and push the key. So as soon as the first thing it's going to do before it actually writes it is it turns the LED off. So the LED is going to be on for 100 microseconds. The LED is going to turn off, and the first thing it's going to do is it's going to write and tell the servo to move to that position, which is going to be 20, okay? So it's going to go, it turns it on, and it turns it off, the LED, and then as soon as the LED turns off, the servo is going to start moving. Now there's a delay in time because the servo is moving up and then it has to change direction and move down. So there's a delay in the motor and things like that. But basically, this is the easiest way I could quickly come up with a way to isolate the actual activation of a key press. So I did the exact same test that I did before previously with the manual key press, but I did the same test with just the servo, and I collected the data to see if there was any actual meaningful difference. And so what I did was I tested it at 0.5 milliseconds, or I'm sorry, 0.5 millimeters at the very top of the key press, the normal cherry activation point at 2 millimeters, and then all the way down at 3.5 millimeters. Yes, technically, because it's an analog switch and I know exactly where it's at, it could be 0.1 millimeter and 4, but there's lots of mechanical factors that come into play with the cherry switch itself, so I thought that these would be safer values to measure, and I don't know exactly what Cooler Master is going to end up doing with this key activation point, so I don't want to promise that, oh, it's going to activate at 0.1 milliseconds and all that type of stuff, but at this point in time, I was able to collect the data so that it did collect it at 0.5 millisecond, or 0.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters, and 3.5 millimeters, and this was the result of the data. So the data shows that it took about, on average, 10 frames of time for the 0.5 millisecond, or 0.5 millimeters. Man, I'm saying that a lot. And then at the 2 millimeter point, it took 12.4 frames, and then 3.5 millimeter took an average of 14 frames. This says there actually is a meaningful difference in the amount of time it takes to press a key. Okay. Now, how much is that? We have to multiply that again by 120 frames per second divided by, it's 1 second divided by 120 is 8.333. And so if we multiply those, it takes 88 milliseconds for the key to actually initially start responding. So again, there is that delay of the motor that is coming into play, but it's pretty fast and it's pretty reliable and pretty consistent. So any variance that we see with this is going to be the actual motion of the key. So that translates to a difference of 14 milliseconds from the top of the press to 2 millimeters, and a difference of 28 milliseconds overall for the whole press. So you could kind of say that it takes about 28 milliseconds to press the key from 0.5 millimeters down to 3.5 millimeters. So in order to move at 3 millimeters, we know it's roughly 30 milliseconds of time. So that's a pretty good indication that that chunk of time is related specifically to moving the actual switch itself. So I found that to be pretty interesting. And that does provide definitive proof that it does actually matter where in the key press that activation happens by a noticeable amount. It's 28 milliseconds of time between the top and the bottom, and a normal cherry switch is 15 milliseconds. And if you think about it, so if a game is playing at like 60 frames per second, that difference could actually matter in the grand scheme of things in frame time and game time, frame time, and everything. If someone is able to activate a function 1 frame faster than you, that frame is processed faster, and that means that someone gets their ability off faster in League of Legends or whatever than you do by 1 frame, can actually decide whether or not you win a battle. It is a meaningful difference. Is it a huge difference? Not really. It's pretty small. In the grand scheme of things, we're 300 milliseconds for the whole like feedback loop. That's not a huge difference. It's maybe 5% or 10% or something like that of the actual impact of it, but it is a meaningful difference. Now, the interesting thing you might be thinking is like, well, what is the practical application of activating the key press at the very bottom? That's, if you're trying to convince me that, oh, you need to have it at the very top, why even bother putting it at the bottom? Now, the interesting thing is there's actually research that indicates that having a tempo, or if you're trying to respond to like a rhythm game where you need to like keep beat, having the activation point happen when your fingers bottom out or when it actually stops and hits something, kind of like if you're using a drumstick and you want to keep beat, it's easy for you to keep that beat in time if the impact of the drum provides a feedback of your muscles and everything hitting an impact, and you can reliably, in a very consistent amount of time, keep that beat because it hits the impact and you have that feedback and you can keep that time. But if your key is activated at the very top, and you're trying to keep beat in time, you're not actually activating that time, and you're going to have a delay of 30 milliseconds, and so you might actually be missing notes and things if you're playing Osu or some other rhythm games where that timing of the sound actually really matters. So if you are playing those types of games, you can actually use this keyboard, put the activation point down at the very bottom, and it activates at the point where your key gives you that visual impact, or the physical impact, and it actually matters. It really matters. And ultimately, that's the thing I'm trying to convince you of, is that these types of things and using analog keys provide a meaningful difference. Like, it provides an actual physical response and a loop of feedback that you can't get with just a normal mechanical switch. And so something I'd like to convey is, as in all my videos, I like to play some type of game. So what I'd like to do is choose a game that has a very important aspect of being able to move very, very fast and move quickly and responsive. And that game is Quake Champions. All right, so here we have Quake Champions. So I'm sure you've heard of Quake before. This is basically based off of Quake 3, very classic game that requires lots of quick reaction times and things like that. But the thing that I wanted to convey with this game is how it responds to your movement versus based off of the activation point. So I've developed this skill of using analog movement, and when you do that, what you expect is when you just barely push the key in a little bit, you expect something to happen on the game. Like, I'm conditioned to have movement happen when I push it. But if I'm pushing this key in just a little bit, nothing's actually happening in this game. Now, this game has no analog movement because it's just not designed to actually take advantage of analog movement, because there's not any really gameplay experience where you'd want to be moving kind of slow in Quake, because you want to be moving as fast as possible. But regardless, I expect movement to happen right when I push the key. And right now, nothing's happening when I'm pushing the key in just a little bit. And that's feels broken to me. Now, this is activating with the normal cherry switch activation point of 2 millimeters. So unless I push the key down 2 millimeters, then it won't actually respond. So there's that little lag in movement. And we showed previously that that does actually matter, right, in terms of responsiveness. So when I'm playing this game normally, it feels okay, but I feel like as I'm moving around, it's not quite responding to my movements how I would expect. And the way I've been conditioned using analog movement, it doesn't feel as responsive as I want it. So there's a mode on this keyboard that allows you to set the activation point to be at the very top of the press, and now my movement feels like ridiculously responsive. It's awesome. Like, you can see I'm just going to barely put my finger on the D key, and it moves with me just touching the keycap. Like, it can be that responsive, where I have to keep your fingers off the keyboard, otherwise you might accidentally start moving to the right. That's how responsive you can make an analog key be. But now it feels like really good. Like, I can move back and forth, left and right, like as fast as I possibly can, just by moving slightly, like just barely pushing that key, and I'm responding. It's a much different experience, and I feel far more responsive in moving around when I have that type of movement. So I think that might be able to convey to you that it does matter being able to set the activation point wherever you want, wherever you're comfortable with. You may not want it to respond right at that point, but regardless, it doesn't limit the ability, because if you want it to be at 0.5 millimeters or 2 millimeters or wherever, the keyboard will allow you to set that activation point wherever you want. And so just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to make a change on the keyboard real fast. So now you can see I set it to be at the very bottom. So say for some reason you like it to activate at the bottom in this particular game, you can see I'm pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down, and then it responds. So it's right now at the very bottom of the key press. But you can set it with a very quick setting on the keyboard to put it anywhere in the key press that you want. And that is the beauty of analog keys, is that it gives you complete control over how you want that key to respond in any game. All right, so I think I answered my question. How long it takes to actually activate a mechanical key switch is pretty long, but it actually does matter when you activate that key press to make a keystroke happen on your computer. We have a lot of interesting things coming on very soon. We have the Cooler Master MK850 that will be released very, very soon. and hopefully you have some more interesting things to look forward to coming about with that. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more, go ahead and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching.